This reading is from Revelations. Write this to the angel of the church in Pergamum. These are the words of the one who has the sharp, two-edged sword. I know that you are living right where Satan's throne is. You are holding on to my hand, and you didn't break faith with me even at the time that Antipas, my faithful witness, was killed among you, where Satan lives. But I have a few things against you, because you have some there who follow Balaam's teaching. Balaam had taught Balak to trip up the Israelites so that they would eat food sacrificed to idols and commit sexual immorality. In the same way, you have some who follow the Nicolaitans teaching. So change your hearts and lives. If you don't, I am coming to you soon, and I will make war on them with the sword that comes from my mouth. If you can hear, listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. I will give those who emerge victorious some of the hidden manna to eat. I will also give to each of them a white stone with a new name written on it, which no one knows except the one who receives it.
Prepare your ears and your hearts for the Holy Gospel according to St. Luke in the 8th chapter. Jesus and his disciples sailed to the Gerasenes land, which is across from the lake of Galilee. As soon as Jesus got out of the boat, a certain man met him. The man was from the city and was possessed by demons. For a long time he had lived among the tombs, naked and homeless. When he saw Jesus, he shrieked and fell down before him. Then he shouted, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, child of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." He said this because Jesus had already commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had taken possession of him, so that he would be bound with leg irons and chains and placed under guard. But he would break his restraints, and the demon would force him into the wilderness. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had entered him. They pleaded with him not to order them to go back into the abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs. Jesus gave them permission, and the demons left the man and entered the pigs. The herd rushed down the cliff into the lake and drowned. When those who tended the pigs saw what happened, they ran away and told the story in the city and in the countryside. People came to see what happened. They came to see Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone. He was sitting at Jesus' feet, fully dressed and completely sane. They were filled with awe. Those people who had actually seen what had happened told him how the demon-possessed man had been delivered. Then everyone gathered from the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave their area because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and returned across the lake. The man from whom the demons had gone begged to come along with Jesus as one of his disciples. Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return home and tell the story of what God has done for you." Then he went through the city proclaiming what Jesus had done for him. The gospel of our Savior. Still love that song. Names are pretty important things. They are a fundamental part of our identity. Parents spend hours poring over books of baby names, trying to find the one that will perfectly fit the baby or their family. We transgender people usually spend an enormous amount of time choosing our new name, and some have to try out more than one. Yet our Revelation passage tonight says that God has one already for us. We get upset when someone forgets or mangles our name. I cannot begin to tell you how many different ways people have chosen to spell or pronounce Wichmann. Names are a sensitive issue because they're a primary source of identity. And identity is a big issue in our culture, with ever-expanding digitization taking place. Big Brother and big business want to know everything about us, except what's important to us. Whether we're trying to prevent identity theft or protect the identity of our children from online predators, who we are and what we choose to share about ourselves is taking on a higher profile in our lives. At the same time, we don't want to be reduced to statistics, stereotypes, or strategic interests. We do want to be known. That old saying, I don't want to be just another number or statistic, still rings true. But it seems that this fear is not a new thing. People have always been concerned about being just another number. In our passage from Luke today, the demon-possessed gives his name as Legion, a Roman military term denoting an attachment of about 6,000 soldiers plus their supporters. His name was expressed numerically, as we read, because many demons had entered him. But he did not say that his name was Beelzebub or any of the other names for demons that we commonly find in the Bible. No, he identified himself as Legion because he was filled with so many demons that he could only choose a name that represented such a multitude. His name was derived from a number. Ironic, isn't it, that a person struggling for their own identity amidst a horde of demons should choose a name like that? This story we read from Luke is set in the middle of a road trip by Jesus and the disciples. Luke concludes this adventure to show God's power over all of the things humans can't control. As they set out across the Sea of Galilee, the famous episode of Jesus calming the waves comes first, showing the ability to tame the new natural world. Then comes our passage where Jesus tames evil and demonic powers. Then Jesus heals a hemorrhaging woman and raises Jairus' daughter from the dead, demonstrating power over sickness and death. By the end of their trip together, Jesus has mastered most of the persistent difficulties of the human existence, nature, evil, and death, and does it all even on enemy turf. You see, the region across the Sea of Galilee where they landed, near Jessara, was a Gentile area, as the pigs in the story indicate. And as soon as Jesus comes ashore, he is accosted by a raving lunatic, a man so out of his mind that he's running around naked, living in a cemetery, so violent that the townspeople tried to keep him in chains. Jesus hardly has a chance to get 2 feet on dry land before this man comes up, gets in his face, screaming at him. Not exactly the greeting one would like when in a foreign land. When Jesus arrives, we are surprised to find out that the man already knows who this is, informed perhaps by the demons within him. Nevertheless, he seeks Jesus out rather than fleeing, and he speaks to Jesus, recognizing the begotten child of God. What have you to do with me, Jesus, child of the Most High God? I beg of you, do not torment me. And Jesus, though he probably already knew the man's name, still asked that devastating question. What is your name? Yes, the man already knew Jesus' name. And yes, Jesus probably already knew the man's name. Nevertheless, Jesus, the incarnate God, went ahead and asked that intimate question. What is your name? To let the man identify himself, It is so typical of Jesus to make the interpersonal contact, the touch, the word, to have conversation with so-called unclean people, and in doing so, establishing a relationship with them, however they identify. Jesus speaks to all to whom no one else will speak. Jesus listened to all with no one to listen to them. And he does so in the most intimate way. He simply asks their name. As usual, I used several commentaries in preparing this sermon. One thing I noticed is that every one of them referred to this man as a demoniac. And that began to bother me. While it is accurate, it is a label, a way to categorize and pigeonhole them. When we place someone into a category, we begin to strip away the humanity of that person. They become the group. This becomes a way to more easily limit that person to preconceived ideas of how we think they will act. He becomes less human in their eyes. It's the beginning of oppressing them. Now, Legion was clearly not the man's given name. I'm sure his parents didn't name him Legion or Battalion or even Regiment. However, there is a newscaster named Major. No, his name was probably Gaius or Philip or some other proper Greek name. But Legion was the name that he acquired, kept, and used. Legion was not a nickname or an affectionate moniker. It was more like a stigma, a label, or a curse. But more than that, it was how he had come to identify himself. He had lost the connection with the name his mother used to call him home for the evening meal. The name that his father spoke sternly when he misbehaved. All that was lost to the way he felt inside, full of demons and evil and pain. His very identity had been taken over by his torment. He could only call himself Legion at this point. Legion is not the only one who has a name that says something about them. Many of the proper names in scriptures are based on a certain meaning. Isaac means he laughs. Jesus means God saves. Many of our last names today are the result of our ancestors' occupations: farmer, tailor, or smith. For many of our first names have roots in specific meanings as well. Nancy comes from beloved in Hebrew. But Legion describes the way that man felt about himself. Legion was a man who believed his condition, believed in his hopelessness and despair, believed that his situation was as good as it got. Legion was indeed a severe case, but he is by no means alone. I wonder sometimes how much we are like Legion. Perhaps we're not running around naked and screaming at people and living amongst the gravestones in the cemetery. Or standing in a gay church brings whole new meanings to that. Perhaps we don't go around naming ourselves after our problems. I certainly didn't name myself dysphoria. But I suspect that each of us has a name for ourselves based on our self-identity. We may never speak it aloud. It might be too hard or painful to recognize or admit, but I think it's there. It may change over time. It may come and go. It may be buried under years of denial and repression, remembered only recently or when we endure a significant life change. But who among us hasn't been wounded by self or by others? Who hasn't suffered from nagging questions about the value of their very self? Who hasn't wondered about God's ability to love them in the face of their own sin or the sin that has been heaped upon them? In the face of Jesus' question, "What is your name?" how would you answer? Legion called himself that because so many demons had entered into him. Maybe your name is crisis because there is so much stress in your life that you run from place to place, putting out fires and instead of spending time doing what you enjoy, but never able to find time for it. Maybe your name is blues because you are depressed so often and so severely that you can barely get out of bed in the morning and you break into tears at a moment's notice. Maybe your name is exhausted because there are only so many hours in a day and the demands on them far exceed your ability to squeeze even one more minute out of them. Maybe your name is COVID because the stress of living during a pandemic exceeds your ability to cope. Legion accepted his name as a way of life. He didn't ask Jesus to drive out the demons. In fact, he was so hopeless that he felt Jesus was playing with him, taunting him, tantalizing him with the possibility of power over his legion. I read this passage to say that Legion felt so unclean that the purity of Jesus' own spirit made him feel unworthy of love and respect than before. That Jesus' presence was a mockery of his pain, showing him what he could not even hope for. But look what happened. A long time ago, Jesus landed on the shore of a foreign land, saw a man in torment, and began to heal him, and asked his name. Jesus does no less for us today. Jesus lands on the foreign shores of our hearts, the places most removed from his own homeland, farthest from the presence of God. Christ sees us in torment, whatever they may be, whatever hurts, betrays, or disgusts us most. Jesus begins to heal us before we can recognize him, before we can even begin to hope, sometimes before we even know something is wrong. But we recognize Christ when they come, and we are terrified and humiliated by the holiness and the presence of the divine healing heart in the face of our bruised one. And then Jesus asks our name, and we can but stammer legion, or crisis, or bruises, or trauma, and then we know that Christ loves us. Jesus comes to challenge and exorcise every power, every demon that prevents us from living fully and freely as human beings, created in the image of God. Jesus claims sovereignty over not just our souls, but over our very lives here on earth, by using the most simple technique. What is your name? The beginning of faith is that moment when we know that God cares enough to ask our name, to become intimate with us, to love us in spite of the condition of our heart. The healing, the driving out of demons, the passage of grief, the finding of lost time, those things are assured once we know that God knows us by our true name, child of God, and forgets the name that we give ourselves. But Bible witnesses so often, many times, when God changes the names of the faithful. Abram became Abraham, and with it became the blessing of a multitude of ancestors. Jacob became Israel, and the Hebrew people carry his name to this day. And Simon, the fisherman, became Peter, the rock, the foundation of the early church. Legion became the man who had been possessed by demons, and he sits at the feet of Christ, clothed and in his right mind, proclaiming Christ in his land. As followers of Christ, we need to remind ourselves that Christ asks our name not just once, but again and again, whenever we name ourselves and ignore the name that God has given. He is always coming to us and asking that question. What is your name? As if to say, don't forget that your real name is child of God. And our faith is born or reborn every time Jesus asks. Whether it is the first time or the latest, listen for Christ asking, what is your name?